One of the biggest drawbacks of 1970s Ford trucks is the 4x4s in particular never came with an overdrive transmission. That's why in this episode of Dentside Depot, we're going to swap this ZF5 5-speed overdrive transmission into this 79 F250 Crew Cab that also now has a 460 big block Ford engine in it. Stay tuned, let's get this really cool project underway. Okay, now the ZF5 is known for being a really solid transmission, and I can't wait to get this particular setup into this truck. So what I want to do is I want to get you caught up to what I've done so far, because it's not just a simple 1 or 2 day process here. There's going to have to be some planning that goes into getting this done. But the nice thing about this video is I'm going to show you everything that you need to do to get them into one of these trucks. So the first thing that I did was I actually already have had the transmission in, and I mocked up where I wanted to put my Crossmember, and that brings us to the transmission mount. And for this video, we're going to be using vintage truck and 4x4's really awesome heavy duty transmission mount. And you can see this thing is an absolute beast, and believe it or not, it's not made for ZF5 swaps, but it really fits in perfectly for this application. More about this later, but what I want to talk about now is the Crossmember. And you can see what I've done here is I have moved the Crossmember back, and I have calculated that the Crossmember needs to go back exactly 2 inches. So all I did was just measured 2 inches back from the regular holes, drilled them out to 7/16. You could also do 3/8. I wanted to make them a little bit bigger just to give me some more flexibility. And the Crossmember went in fine, and you're gonna see that the transmission bolts in absolutely perfect at this point. So that's your first step, is you're gonna have to move the Crossmember back, and I've already gone ahead and done that. The next thing you're gonna have to think about is what type of big block Ford engine do you have? Well, there's 2 different types. There's an internal balance and there's an external balance. And there's a really easy way to figure out which one you have. It does not take very much rocket science to figure it out. If you have this little hatchet weight in the front on the inside of the balancer, that means you have an externally balanced 460, and that means you are good to go for this swap with all factory parts. All ZF5 460 trucks in the 80s and 90s were external balanced. So the only pressure plate that you can get that's going to be a factory part is going to be an externally balanced flywheel, which you can see right here. If you have an internally balanced D1VE or a Dove A or something else along those lines, you're going to have to do one of 2 things. You're either going to have to get your flywheel sent out to be machined and then rebalanced with no external weight on it, or number 2, you're going to have to buy a swap flywheel kit. There are a couple different companies out there that sell them. They're more expensive, but it might probably offset the cost of paying a machine shop to do the work for you. So you're gonna have to make that decision on your own. For my application, I don't need to worry about it. I'm external balanced, so I can use off-the-shelf parts and not have a problem with that particular item. Okay, the next thing you're gonna have to make a decision on is where is your pilot bearing going to go? Because there's gonna be 2 different types that come in the kit. There's the big one and there's the small one, and both of them will go into the crank. What I did was I just wanted to confirm the crank that I have compared to my ZF5, so that's why I mounted it up with no pilot bearing in it, and with the shield off, the spacer plate off, so I could visually confirm that I did need the bigger one, because that is where the input shaft sits, is right here for how my setup is going to be. So that's something you're going to have to figure out for your particular application. Of course, you can measure it with a depth gauge and figure all that out as well. But most likely you're going to probably want the bigger one, but there might be applications where you need the smaller guy here. So that brings us to the next item, which is if you are swapping a truck and you don't have all the parts, you are going to need this special piece right here, which is the ZF5 spacer plate. Now, there's a couple things here that differ from a regular spacer plate. Your factory Dentside spacer plate is not going to work. The crank hole isn't big enough, and it's not spaced correctly for the starter for this particular application. It also doesn't have this indent down here that is a cover for the bottom of the ZF5 that catches all the clutch material and lets it fall out the bottom. You can expect to pay somewhere between $100 and $200 for one of these plates. They are not remanufactured. Holley does sell a flat plate, but it's not going to work for this application. You definitely just want to go ahead and just spend the money and get the correct factory application plate, and you will be good to go. So now let's start putting this thing together and getting our ZF5 swap underway. Okay, so you are going to need obviously fasteners for the flex plate. I'm using this particular ARP brand. If you're buying the bolts, in my opinion, you might as well just get the good ones anyway. So let's go ahead and get this on here. I'm just going to get the bolts in to start, and then I'll pull them out to lube under the head of the bolt, and I'll probably do some blue or maybe red Loctite. Figure it out. And that is right here. Bolts go in here nicely first, and then I'll pull them back out and put some underhead lube, and I'm probably just going to do blue. Okay, they're all installed per ARP's directions, and now I'm just going to do 3 steps. I'm going to start with a light torque, working my way up to 85. I might have to hold the crank here somehow. 40, 40. Definitely don't forget this black plate, or metal plate. And this is the heavy part. Okay, so I got the pressure plate torqued down, and I wasn't happy with the bolts that I had, so I actually switched to a grade 8 1-inch underhead length flange bolt. So I did make that little change here really quick, but now let's drop this transmission in and see how it fits here. Okay, I obviously have my throwout bearing and my clutch fork installed already. I did not put the cylinder on yet. I'm going to wait until the transmission's installed to do that. Plastic alignment tool, and now it's just a matter of hoping that the clutch is lined up enough that this slips on nicely here. Looks like I need to go back up a little bit. Okay, and the transmission is now connected to the engine, and I don't like to do movie magic. It took me about 10 minutes adjusting the transmission and the engine up and down to get the angle right, because the last thing you want to do here is push that thing in and snap the input shaft or snap a dowel or something like that. But you can now see why this special cover here for these 460s is so important, because if you don't have it, your starter bolts are not going to line up correctly. Nothing's going to line up correctly, and you're going to have major issues. So we're almost done here today, and of course I'll have some more stuff to button up. But that brings us to the transmission mount. We're using vintage truck and 4x4's heavy duty, super duty transmission mount that they have, severe duty I should say. And this is not intended for a ZF5 swap, but I've moved the Crossmember back like I said, and I think we're going to have a perfect fit here. So the reason I like this is because, look, I have 2 replaceable bushings, and instead of it just being a flat piece of rubber like a factory mount is, we have an actual correct mount, kind of like the Bronco graveyard mount. It's a real mount, not a fake one here, which is what I like, and it should fit in perfect, and it's pretty easy to set up here. Orienting my mount in this direction. For this particular application, you may need to flip it depending on if you have an automatic or a manual transmission, but this is what I need for my particular application. So that's all I need to do here to get this in and together, and I just want to see it on there mostly for right now. So really good looking mount. Let's slip it under there, jack it up a little bit. There you go, folks. You got a perfect fit. And there we go. That makes a ZF5 swap pretty darn simple in one of these trucks. You can see how nicely it fits. Of course, I got to get the bolts in there and everything, but moving that cross member back 2 inches, orienting the mount in that direction, and it fits perfect. Now, one other thing I do want to go over with you here that you're going to need to know about the swap. Now I've moved my transmission back 2 inches, so that means the transfer case is no longer going to fit in its factory position. In addition, the ZF5 has an obstruction that does not allow an NP205 to bolt up. Now, if you're going to use a modern transfer case, none of this applies. But for me, it does. And that is because these guys right here, the shift rails, will hit the back of the ZF5 transmission, but it's actually a very simple fix, and it should only take you about 10 minutes to do, but it does involve permanently modifying the case of the transmission. So if you're not positive this is a swap you want to do, then you might want to hold off on this step until you absolutely know. All I did was take a 7/8 bit and I lined it up approximately like this on the back of the transfer case. You can see right here, and I just zipped a hole right through the back of the transmission. Just zipped the hole right through the back of the transmission until it popped out. Then I marked it, and then I hit it with a little air saw, and then I hit it with a little bit to just ream it off, and then I used another saw to cut this out. There's a bunch of YouTube videos out there that show you how to do this, but it's very, very simple. Some people say a 1-inch bit. I just went 7/8 just to be sure. But what you absolutely do want to make sure you do is that you leave enough flange. You leave enough flange here on the side so you can see there's enough gasket material, and that's just how Ford did it as well. So that's exactly how you want it to be. So the NP205 will now literally just bolt right up. It's the same spline and everything else. And I'm just going to move my transfer case bolt holes back 2 inches as well, so everything lines up perfectly, exactly like it should. Of course I'm gonna bolt the transfer case on first and make sure that it's good, but then I'll make that modification and we'll be good to go. So that wraps up our ZF5 swap. I do have a factory slave cylinder that I'm going to put on. I'm not totally sure how I'm going to modify the firewall for that yet. There's a few options out there, so I'm still thinking about that one. But regardless, this has been everything that you need to know for the ZF5 swap. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Dentside Depot, vintage truck and 4x4 severe duty mount for all Ford applications, including ZF5. You can see it's a perfect fit. Remember to like and subscribe and keep restoring those classic trucks.